Hello there, we're Luke and Matt, and welcome to 10 Minutes That Make a Difference. We take 10 minutes each week to discuss topics where faith and life intersect. And so today we're talking about what it means to be a good neighbor, and what does that look like, and why is it so difficult in our day and age. But before we dive into that, I want to take a moment to acknowledge that this is our 4th podcast. Which is a big deal because most podcasts don't make it past episode 3. So here we are beating the stats.
Bam.
Boom. That's right. So, but with all that aside, Matt, why is it so... What about this topic of being a good neighbor? Like, why is it important, and what's going on with it in our culture?
For sure. So I think first off, just like we all want to know our neighbors, like, you know, just naturally, like it's good to want to know the people that are living next to you and that are around you.
Absolutely.
And it's fascinating that even in the Bible, it's actually a concept about loving your neighbors that is throughout the entirety of Scripture. It's just this idea of loving your neighbor. Mm-hmm. And so one of the most famous parables, the Good Samaritan, is actually about that question where someone asks Jesus, well, who is my neighbor? The question is kind of obvious. Like, if I'm to love my neighbor, you know, well, how far does that go? Does that go to just the people who are around me physically? Does that go to my neighbors ethnically or racially? Or does that go even beyond that to, to my foreign nation or enemies or stuff like that?
How far?
Yeah, and so, of course, this conversation, though, Jesus essentially says that, your neighbor is even your enemy. And so he says there's really no boundary to who your neighbor is. Like, everyone is your neighbor.
Definitely radical from what you're saying.
Mind-blowing thing.
Yeah.
And it's something we can so easily say and think like, oh yeah, like I'm going to seek to love my neighbor. But in practice, I think if we actually evaluate ourselves of where we're at with that, it's really tough.
Yeah.
You know, so I'd say like what Jesus is saying there is kind of like a varsity level teaching of loving your enemy. Mm-hmm. But I wonder, to really show like how good we're doing at it, like, do we even not on a JV level, but even like a kindergarten level, do we even know the people who live physically around us, like our actual literal physical neighbors?
Right, because we can all, like what you're saying, like we can all just say, oh, of course, if like my neighbor were bleeding out, I'd do something
Idealistic.
for him. Idealistic.
That's millennials, we love it.
But are we actually even just knowing their name? Can we say hi to them when we pass them in the hallway? Yeah, that's a good question.
And call out by name, saying, hey, Jerry.
Yeah.
Or whatever.
Oh, names.
Yeah, exactly. So one way I've heard that's a good way to do a self-assessment here, and if you're at home and have pencil or paper in front of you, you can do this little self-assessment or even do it in your head. But think of like a Tic Tac Toe box, Tic Tac Toe, and then who are the neighbors around you? So put yourself in the middle of that Tic Tac Toe box, and then all the other 8 checks box, little moments around it. Can you even fill that out with the people that live around you? So like the person who lives in front of your house, the person who lives behind, to your left, to your right, and then even on the corners. Can you fill that out with their names?
That's hard.
Maybe like Luke and I, like you might live in the city where it's more of like the people who live above you and below you. And I can actually name the people who live above and below me, but the people who live on my right and left and front and behind me, like I can't do that. And I wonder how many, like what percentage of Americans actually can name those.
I don't think very many right now.
And so a lot of like a cultural analysts, cultural critics have actually been kind of sensing and seeing that we're actually, as a society, getting worse and worse at being able to actually know and identify our neighbors, that we're actually more and more less likely to not know them.
Wow.
And so there's this comic recently who has this skit about someone ringing your doorbell, and it's pretty hilarious. But kind of the whole joke is that 20 years ago, when someone would ring your doorbell, people were excited about it. Like people were excited to like invite that person in, have them there. It was like an exciting family moment.
Yeah.
But now, his joke is that like when someone rings your doorbell, like the lights go off.
Yeah.
That like everyone goes to the floor and tries to pretend like they're not there.
Right. Because
we're just terrified of who's this intruder, who's this person,
who's here, like what are they trying to sell me, what's going on, like just this fear.
And so it's beyond that too. It's not just comics who are talking about this. Even sociologists are talking about it, and there's a new book that came out a couple of years ago called The Vanishing Neighbor. And in that, like the sociologist is talking about the raw data that it's true. Like we have in America just less and less of a sense of our neighbors and less of a communal identity with the people that live in physical proximity around us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so, Luke, like, why do you think that is? Like, what are some of the problems that you're seeing there for why there's this shift towards not knowing your neighbor?
Yeah, it's like me and Matt were talking about it. I think we kind of came to this kind of conclusion that like all the things that are kind of going on could kind of be summed up through just saying like there is this growing mistrust.
Yes.
Like the fear and the mistrust of the other, of our neighbor, of the person who we don't know. Right? And we have 3 T's for you. We have technology, transience, and then tribalism.
We love alliterations as pastors, so
yes,
whenever we can get those, we feel like it's a win.
Yes. So, but those 3 things I think really do play into building this culture of mistrust. And the first one, technology, like, right?
What do you see there?
I think like it's just this, I think one thing is that like one of the benefits is also one of the hindrances to it in this. Like because of technology, we can stay connected with people who we don't see anymore, who are far away and stuff like that. And that kind of keeps us kind of socially capped because we're connecting with people and we feel connected with those who aren't geographically close to us. We don't feel this need all the time to actually reach out to those who are geographically close to us, but we just don't know yet. I also think there's like this thing that goes on, kind of like this universal do not disturb sign where I've got my phone up and I'm looking at my phone, right? And we all know that means don't mess with me, and it's sort of just this I think you described it as a crutch.
Totally, yeah. Like I think all this event, the party where we see everyone is on their phones. And it used to not be that way. Like people used to actually just be engaging with one another as they were hanging out. But now like literally you can be at a party with family or anyone and like most people will be on their phones and they're not engaging. And I feel like part of like building new friendships is like there is a certain awkwardness at first. If we pass that awkwardness, but because we can just so quickly pull out our phones and look like we're no longer insecure, like we're confident, like we're all set, then we use that as a crutch to not actually start those conversations.
Yeah. And then I think so that's technology and then transience, right?
So much.
We move so much more. And I think, because we move for jobs and good reasons, but we've lost a sense of place. And I think with that comes that history. Right?
Yes.
Because I don't have a history here anymore. And the person who's also been here doesn't have a history. And so we feel like we're strangers meeting on the road as we're passing. And I think that creates there's this fear because there's no longer this sort of shared history, this shared sort of vetting. Like we don't, my parents can't say, oh, I know so-and-so because they've lived here for generations too. I think that's something we really miss.
Yeah. And then because we're so unsure of like someone's past history, like everyone in a sense feels like a stranger. And I think even like watching the news that even flares it up more where now they're not like a stranger, but they're like a suspicious stranger.
Yeah, that is another one for sure. And then I'm beginning to feel this, and I think especially living in the city, it seems like everyone kind of has an expiration date on them.
Yeah.
There's sort of this timestamp, like you're going to move eventually or have to go somewhere, and that's just life.
Yeah.
But then there can kind of be this sort of cynicism or this kind of like exhaustion.
Like, why even invest?
Right. Why invest? Why get to know someone well when they're just going to move? Like, and I think that's a really negative attitude to take towards it, but it's a real one.
But it's a real, like, especially when you have invested a lot in a person or in a relationship, and then that person moves, and it's kind of like, well, am I just going to put myself through all that again? Yeah.
And then the last one is tribalism. I think we are so much more connected around our special interests and experiences now, and that just makes it so much clearer for us to see who the other person is.
Yeah.
More than any other time, we're identified by what we like, what we watch, and who we vote for. And if you're not in our camp, you're not to be trusted. Yeah. You're not someone who I can even have a base level interaction with. I saw a video or an article on Facebook the other day and didn't click on it, so I won't pretend to know everything that happened in that, but simply to say that it was saying that this woman was refusing to sit next to someone who was of the opposite political persuasion of them. And, you know, that's just, I think, like, that kind of thing does happen where we're we immediately view the other as an antagonist, as a enemy, rather than a neighbor to be loved. Yeah. And so, Matt, like, what are some quick tips here about how we can move forward and try our best to love our neighbor in this culture?
For sure. I think the first thing is just acknowledging the reality that it is more challenging to know your neighbors now.
Yeah.
Like to just totally not pay attention to that and say like, oh, we're just being lazy or we don't care. Like I think that just misses the fact that like there are different cultural factors and implications that have changed that in truth have made it harder for us to know our neighbors. So like if we're putting the same effort that we put in maybe 20 years ago, like we probably won't get to know them. So like what it does take is it takes intentionality.
Yeah.
We actually have to go out of our way to get to know our neighbors, out of our way to get to know the people around us. And so like a few things I recommend is like let's say you're out of an egg and you need it for cooking or out of salt or out of mayonnaise for your recipe, for your salad dressing. Knocking on your neighbor's door and just asking for that thing rather than going to the grocery store, but just small intentional ways of actually getting to know them.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like the simple ones, but also just taking that social risk of inviting them over. I invited our neighbors over for dinner. I put little things on their door with a few options of what times would work for them, and thankfully like the same dates worked for both our upstairs and downstairs neighbors. So I was relieved when I saw that. But I had them over for dinner, and afterwards, first off, we had a great time.
Oh, good.
But afterwards, it was fascinating. One of the neighbors said, I've lived in this building for 12 years.
Wow.
And this is the first time I've ever been inside one of the other 3 units of our building.
Wow. That's remarkable.
Yeah. And so it takes intentionality. But with that, like, I just saw a neighbor go outside and, we called each other by name.
Yeah. That's so good. And I think for me, like the key is just recognizing that like my experience and like my desire for connection and community is not just mine.
Yeah.
As a RA on campus, I would have students come up to me and say, I really want like a deeper, richer sense of community. And what I would tell them is like, well, you and a whole bunch of other people, because you're like the third or fourth person this month to say that to me. And so you guys all live with each other, just knock on each other's doors. And I think that's still just in our life. That's the same experience where I'm feeling lonely and I don't have anything to do on a Friday night, but I'm afraid to reach out and see if anyone's busy because, they're out, they're having fun, and they're not experiencing any level of loneliness. And that's just not true.
Yeah. No, it's something we all experience. I have that exact same feeling. I mean, you're single, I'm married, I have a child as well, and I still just as much experience that feeling of loneliness and wanting that social connection.
Yeah.
So I think it's something that we all are experiencing.
Absolutely. Well, we are way out of time, but thank you for joining us today. Next week, we're going to be talking about the myth of progress, and I'm excited for that conversation. But as always, please leave us your suggestions, any topics you'd love to hear us talk about, any comments, we'd love to respond. But also know that you can subscribe to our podcast on iTunes, and also you can subscribe to us on YouTube too, if that's where you would like to rather see your podcast. So
iTunes, that's at Village Church Chicago.
Village Church Chicago.
Sweet.
Search it and it will pop up right there. So as always, thank you for being with us. We'll see you next time.